Okay, there we go. Now we're on the recording. My God. I'm definitely not a professional streamer, people, right? So, you can't do politics all the time. So, for this episode, we are going to actually be breaking away from politics and just doing some just smashing action figures together, like in our childhood youth, right? So we're going to be looking at power scaling, right? Because that's all power scaling is. It's just, you take two action figures and you bash them together and you use debate in order to figure out who would actually win. Captain Rudy says, many Japanese manufacturers use the alphabet to categorize their engines, A series, B series, etc. Well, I mean, like, Western nations do that too, but I guess there's a degree of, like, I guess you could use it as like a number system in Japanese. Because I know that, like, the letters in Greek were used as like a number system originally as well. So we're gonna be comparing two different videos. So this is gonna be first we're gonna take the negative. Well, actually, yeah, we're gonna do this in reverse order, because normally you would allow the affirmative to speak and then you would have the negative give their case, right? But here we're gonna give the negative the case because I happen to actually, like, agree more with the use of dimensional scaling than against it. But maybe there's something I missed, so let's give MrCraftyScales his due, right? Fushizi says power levels in general don't make sense unless it's used in games. No, they actually do. It's like if you watch Invincible and, like, Debbie fucking, like, clocks Nolan in the face and he knocks him out. Well, that's not going to make a whole lot of sense, considering the guy has, had his face smashed in by people who can crush mountains with their hands, right? That's all really power scaling is just, again, getting a sense of scale for the characters. Because, like, if you're a writer, you do have to have some sense of, like, power scaling, and that you have to know where everyone in the story stands in relationship to each other. Hard power levels don't make sense in storytelling unless you hard respect the scale. Yeah, I mean, we can agree with that, yes, but, like, that's where you get into basically, like, hard and soft magic systems, right? Like, obviously, a soft magic system, you don't really understand it. It's all for awe and, like, the mystical experience, whereas, like, a hard magic system is where it's like the whole point is that you can understand it, and therefore you can infer solutions in a logic problem, right? Captain Rudy says, if math class has taught me anything, it doesn't matter if you do negative plus positive or positive plus negative, you'll still end up with a negative. That, fair enough, right? Wait until we bring in lateral numbers, right? I brought that up for conversation one time in a power scaling community, and I got a bunch of funny looks, right? It's like, what do you mean? Because when I was working on that web novel, I was like, hold on, what if we introduce the concept of imaginary time? How does this actually stack up in, like, speed tiering? And I think I have an answer to that, but yeah. Invincible is hard scaling, DBZ is soft scaling. I actually disagree. I think it's the other way around, right? DBZ does a lot of work to let you know exactly where everyone scales in relation with each other. To be fair, they give you, like, the guidebooks, which aren't really canon to the manga themselves, right? Or the anime, so that's fair. But they do give you the idea of, like, multipliers in the manga and the anime. So it's like there is hard power scaling in Dragon Ball, and it's actually a lot softer, in my opinion, in Invincible. That's actually been one of the complaints about Invincible, is that the power scaling is soft and kind of wishy-washy. Power isn't just about tall, it's about wide as well. Yeah, precisely. This is why power scaling isn't just about, like, how many joules a character can, like, output, right? It's also about things like calculating skill, calculating battle IQ, all that stuff. So it's like it's a real fun thing, in my opinion. I actually really like these conversations because there's a lot of fun conversations you can have, especially in terms of, like, writing. Scaling is something I struggle with in my AI gens. Like, the other day, I did a gen of Lusty Lynx, and I standing in front of a Denny's restaurant, and we were both taller than the doors, which definitely isn't lore accurate, considering Lynx is a tiny little kitty. You know what? Fair enough, Captain Rudy, right?
Length, width, depth. These three components make up our world as we know it, from the actual celestial bodies to the very laws that dictate the natural universe. And for the most part, this is understood by the power scaling community. It's only when talking about theoretical planes beyond our own is when everything gets all loopy. However, I'm here to tell you that the current consensus or understanding is completely flawed and doesn't make sense. So buckle up, sit back, and enjoy the show.
Hold on. Let's see. Fushizi says, how big can you make your numbers? Nah, how effective can you make your numbers? Now let's talk, right? All right, what are we talking about? We talking about Reinhardt Cardinals now? Right? Wait, are we fiddling with the axiom of choice, right? That's when you get into like we're getting into the deep weeds of power scaling, right? But it also happens to be the deep weeds of math. Quality versus quantity, yeah. To be fair, quality is definitely better than quantity, especially in a storytelling setting.
Okay, let's jump into this. I'm not trying to waste anyone's time. The current understanding of the quote-unquote difference between higher dimensions is that it's a beyond unquantifiably infinite difference nonetheless. The whole core of this argument is due to a second dimensional object, in this case a square, could fit into a third dimensional box a beyond infinite amount of times due to having zero depth, thus never gaining any. Now before tackling the major problem with this, let's just humor this idea for a second, just to show you how dumb this reasoning is. From how we actually calculate energy, the thing we dictate how much stronger the other thing is due to producing or generating more, we use such laws such as thermodynamics, all of which require and or use third dimensional logic to even calculate the energy in the first place.
I mean, this is a fair point, right? Like kilograms and joules are units that are implicitly three-dimensional, right? If you add a fourth dimension of a fourth space-like dimension, then like your measurements just don't work, right? Because what you are measuring in our context is a three-dimensional entity, which is only has 3 degrees of freedom. When you add that fourth degree of freedom, well, now again we don't really have a way to quantify that holistically as an entire as a single entity.
You can easily make the inference that a second dimensional plane or object, rather having lesser energy than the third, actually has its own fundamental sublaws that aren't inherently lesser to the third dimension but different. And you have to realize, due to the actual lack of knowledge on this completely theoretical concept, you can't necessarily say one interpretation is better than the other. However, I think this one's more logical than the last. Anyway, let's just say that
I have some issues with that statement.
the example from the second and third dimension is accurate. There's no contentions with this. You do realize that there's nothing that implies that this process repeated onto the fourth or into infinitum. Like, let me just try to conceptualize this idea for you. Take the entire encompassing energy of the universe, hell, let's say an infinite universe. Now say one particle from the fourth dimension, and you will have people genuinely say that that one particle has a beyond infinitely more energy than the actual encompassing universe, all based off one example that can't be proven to be repeated. Which, by the way, is such a massive association fallacy, but I digress.
Well, I mean, it kind of depends. The problem with this is, again, what do you mean by when you say particle? Are you talking like a point particle? Because a point particle is a zero-dimensional entity in the first place, right? Hold on. What's going on here? The chat is speaking. Hold on. Give me a moment. Excuse me. Captain Rudy says, maybe the whole quantity versus quality thing is why Russia sucks at everything, not just war. Right. Okay, fair enough. Kura says, Death Battle is so far off the mark a lot of the time. Goku versus Superman is proof that, let alone the Megamind versus Gru and Rick versus Who. Honestly, I think Doctor Who does actually take the win over Rick, but I did find that fight to be rather ridiculous, to be perfectly honest. I think the Gru versus Megamind fight could go in either way. But I just don't. I was not satisfied with that particular thing. Although, to be fair, they didn't let him have his Metro Man suit or his giant robot. So, again, they kind of didn't operate under their own presumed rules, right? The whole rule set is allegedly that everyone gets everything that they get or that they have had, and that there's like no holds barred, right? That there is like no quarter. So it's like, yeah, it did kind of seem like they were like violating their own rules. Let's see. Fushizi says, then there is the whole problem of higher dimensions doesn't actually equal more space at a certain point. Having more dimensions is more restricting according to the math of it. I mean, it kind of depends, right? So spatial dimensions, like, obviously, when you add an extra degree of freedom, you are adding more to the sea of possible states, right? So if you could think of like a particle having, if you think about like back to like a math class, right, where it's like find the place on the graph, right? You get the x coordinate and the y coordinate, right? That's on a flat land, right? That's all. Those are the only two numbers you really need in relation to the 0 point, where like to figure out where something exists in the flat land. Well, if you live in the three-dimensional world like us, well, you need to add a third variable, which would be like obviously the third dimension. If you add a fourth degree of freedom, then you need a fourth piece of information, and the more you increase this, the more individual pieces of the more information you need to actually locate a thing in space. So like the space will always increase the more degrees of freedom you give it. But that being said, I think I know where he's going with this. Given what he's already said, I think he is going to make an appeal to the fact that we already have higher dimensional physics, and I'm going to explain when we get there why I don't really think that that works. Let's see. Captain Rudy says stuff like that I don't. At Kura, stuff like that I don't take too seriously. It's comedic entertainment. I get a little annoyed by it sometimes, right? Like Bowser versus Eggman, like really kind of like. I liked it as like if it was a equal stats fight, as like okay, yeah, sure, give Bowser the win, but it's not supposed to be an equal stats fight. So that's kind of the point, right? So that one did kind of like annoy me. Chicken Tender says all I can hear while listening to this is let's have a death battle. Yeah, fair enough, right? That's where the death battle comment came in, right? Let's see. Oh my god, I've started a whole war in the chat. Hold on. Chicken Tender says, I agree with Captain Rudy because the first episode of Death Battle I ever seen was Link versus Cloud, and Cloud lost, so yeah, I watched from there on as entertainment only, and I haven't watched in a long time. Let's see. Captain Rudy says, at Chicken Tender and comedic entertainment at that, they're going for dramatic effect and a laugh. Fushizi says Death Battle concluded Pinkie Pie is like Deadpool and can violate the fourth wall, therefore cannot be properly power scaled or measured. Well, that's just nonsense, right? Fushizi says, so they are scientifically accurate. Okay. Captain Rudy said, I think the most realistic death battle was Chuck Norris versus Sagata Sanshiro. Okay, I forgot that was a thing. And Chicken Tender says, at Captain Rudy, exactly, I really enjoy what I really enjoy is for those reasons, because even though they try to cite sources, I feel things are missed as well as they tend to underscale. Oh yeah, they tend to underscale a lot. They won't give anyone their infinite universe scalings when they need the cosmology scale, even though infinite universe sizes aren't actually all that uncommon in fiction. It's actually kind of normal.
Not to mention, there is no proof in any credible theory when discussing quote-unquote higher or extra dimensions that these extra spaces even have more energy than the last, as the term superior is extremely vague, so most intellectual scientists try to stray away from this, because there's no way of quantifying that legitimately. At the end,
I think what he's missing is, again, the volume thing, right? Because obviously a four-dimensional cube, a tesseract, is going to have, like, We'll use 1 meter, right? Or 1 yard. Pick your poison, right? If we have a line that's 1 meter, right? Obviously, there is no volume in there. It's just literally a perimeter without any kind of enclosure. But if we now extend it to a second dimension, so it's a square with 1 meter on each side, then obviously there's significantly more volume in the square than there is in the line. And if we do it again, then we extrapolate it to a third degree of freedom, now we have a cube where every side is 1 meter length, width, and height wise, then again, there's more volume in it, because we even call two-dimensional volume area. There's more volume in the cube than there is in the square, to the point where it's like we even have a different word for volume in a two-dimensional sense, right? We call it area. And if you were to do this in higher dimensions, say for example a tesseract, well, now you have a length, a meter, every face is a meter, length, width, height, and an extra degree of freedom we don't even have a word for. The amount of volume, the amount of things you can fit, at least on a three-dimensional level, stack up, right? You can definitely fit, for example, more people in a four-dimensional. Let's see, like take any given room in your house, right? Now imagine that like all of the sides are equidistant, right? It's as long as it is wide and as tall. Now extend it in a fourth dimension to that same degree. How many more people can you actually fit in there? Well, if we assume, depending on how we do this thing, we can operate under a certain set of assumptions. And actually, I even had this in my web novel, by the way. This was something I used in my web novel, talking about higher dimensional entities, because one of the first kaiju to actually be fought in the web novel was a higher dimensional entity. So it was actually relevant. That we can operate under a couple of assumptions. So our like best one thing we could operate is that like maybe these extra dimensions are curled up on themselves, right? Like a Calabi-Yau space. Now think about like taking a piece of paper and crumpling it up, right? Now imagine you crumple it up over and over and over again until you get smaller and smaller and smaller. That's basically what happened to the extra dimensions in string theory. That manifold that we have is called a Calabi-Yau space. In that particular case, right, that's still so small that we can't really observe it. And again, you have these, if you're extending this outwards, so you're unfolding one of these spatial dimensions to allow the room to extend, well, your three-dimensional room is basically a slice in this larger cube. So it's kind of like asking how many sheets of paper can you fit in a given space, right? Obviously it's much thinner than a sheet of paper, right? And you could do the same thing with Planck length, right? If you were to do the same thing with a Planck length, well, there are more Planck lengths in a meter than there are meters from point A to point, from one end to the other end of the observable universe, right? So ask me. So again, really, just ask the question: which one of these is going to contain more energy, right? The one which can contain a human room of human beings, or the one that can contain literally again more than there are meters from from end to end of the observable universe, number of rooms filled with people. The answer is kind of fucking obvious, right? And that's assuming that, again, we're not really, like, we're talking about like that these spatial dimensions aren't entirely new, right? Because it's also entirely possible, if you take the original assumption that, again, these dimensional differences are that there really is no spatial extension in that new medium. In that case, it really would be, well, it doesn't really matter, because you could fit, like, it's a question of math, right? How many times can you fit 0 into 1, right? It's not that hard to figure out, right? So yeah, there is actually a really good reason to think that like higher dimensional spaces would have an abundance of more energy, assuming that they're actually filled with things, right? So I just got to say that criticism does not make any sense to me. It actually seems like very obviously true that if we have higher dimensional entities and spaces, that they are going to be significantly higher energy than our space.
End of the day, there is no proof of this assertion. It's all based upon a massive association fallacy, and it's not backed by any really credible source. But now it comes down to what we do going forward. Basically, anything beyond a finite degree of scaling is left up to your interpretation. Like, for example, if in Dragon Ball, Otherworld is implied to be greater or to destroy a scale more than the base universe, then it's up to the story to actually quantify this, and of course up to the interpreter as well.
Well, again, yeah, that's true. You should be going based off of what's actually in the source material, right? You shouldn't be just making shit out of your ass. if you're going to do power scaling, you should actually be able to provide citations for your your data. But I also see people do this all the time in the reverse, right? Well, they will take a less authoritative source and then use that as the one that's like overriding the other. For example, you have infinite dimension. You have infinite dimension statements of the multiverses in DC and Marvel. But then you will have Death Battle come in and say, "Oh yeah, in this Green Lantern comic, Green Lantern says that there's only 12.5 dimensions." And it's like, well, yeah, that's Green Lantern, but that doesn't overrule what the literal people from the sphere, what the literal new gods say, right? I think the new gods really do have a overriding authority over what the Green Lantern says, right? I mean, the new gods literally live in the sphere of the gods. Right? They literally live outside of space and time. So what are we doing here? Right? So people downscale this way all the time. It's like when people try to give a finite calculation for the Dragon Ball universe, but they use Bulma of all people as the authoritative source when people that actually are from would have a better knowledge of the true scope of the Dragon Ball universe contradict her, and they just ignore that, right? Because they want to downplay Dragon Ball. But anyway, DC and Dragon Ball get this happen to them all the time. It's like when people. Anyway, we'll talk about it later, I guess, right? I should probably do some reactions to power scaling. I actually do find this a fascinating subject. Hold on. Oh my god, I'm missing so many things. Hold on. Where did I leave off? Let's see. Oh my god. Apparently I missed a lot. Let's see. Fushizi says, I still live by the fact that Rainbow Dash beats Starscream. Fair, right? That is pretty funny. Composite Starscream probably would take the win, but Fushizi says superior is not vague, it means better. Captain Rudy says, according to Death Battle, the fight between Chuck Norris and Sagata Sanshiro is eternal because neither of them can lose. And rip Chuck Norris, fair enough, right? His heart would not dare attack him. See, what he did was he finally made his reservation, and Death just simply fulfilled the request of a good friend. That's all I gotta say, right? We gotta keep those Chuck Norris jokes up. Let's see. He will never be beat, even in the sleep. Let's see. Kura says 3 strongest anime characters. First are Rimuru, second Saitama, third is Sid Shadow Kageno, but since Saitama is a gag superhero, he would always win. Fundamental fact is anime gag characters always win. You ever watched Medaka Box? She's basically the fucking monkey. Medaka is basically the monkey king of anime. Not gonna lie, right? Fushizi says gonna have to throw some number file videos at Cosmic Low, right? Oh my god, yeah. Captain Rudy says at Kura, I'm partial to Spike Spiegel. Fair. Chicken Tender says we are American. What is this meter you speak of? We measure in yards of football fields. Captain Rudy says Chicken Tender, this is America. We don't make cents. We make dollars. God damn, that's a good pun. It just keeps going. They had this whole conversation. Oh my god. No, you don't measure random fucking units like dishwashers or cat. Okay. This is America. We don't make sense. We make. Okay, that was repeated the joke. Fushizi says, a hole the size of 3 dishwashers is open in a local freeway. Will forever live in my head rent free. Was that an actual thing? Did you pull that from like a news coverage or anything like that? Oh my god. Must have found Hassan's mother lying in the middle of the freeway. Oh, woof. Fushizi says, no, it's an actual headline from before the time of Hassan. Let's see. Yeah, the chat is bumping tonight, right, Kura? Oh my god, we're almost there. Okay, Fushizi says, yeah, cubes become spiky in higher dimensions. Fun math fact. Chicken Tender says, yes, I is. Captain Rudy says, at Kuro, we got to keep those numbers up so he can start getting Twitch subs. Thank you. Right? I appreciate the conspiracy. Right? I promote this conspiracy. Right? Chicken Tender says it is fair enough. Captain Rudy says, man, Cosmic Otaku is missing a lot of the chat. I am aware, right? Kuro says, you want to get absurd power scaling, Lovecraft entities there? Yes, but Lovecraft entities don't scale as high as a lot of the power scalers actually want you to think, right? There's a lot of Lovecraft glaze, but the whole idea that like the most powerful horror like verse in fiction, no. No, actually, anyone who's deeply involved in like DC or Marvel can tell you that like DC, Marvel, and Marvel can give both Lovecraft and like the Kingverse actually a run for their money. But again, it goes to that thing of again downplaying of those settings. Let's see. Fushizi says, for cubes in higher dimensions, the distance from the center of the corner increases without bound with the number of dimensions, where the dimension or the distance from the center of the faces remained constant. Someone smarter than me explaining higher dimensional cubes. Was that a number file video by any chance? I think I might have seen something about that. And why they go spiky. Fair. Captain Rudy says, Chuck Norris didn't die. He went on a trip to hell so he can kill the Ayatollah for a second time. While down there, he made a snowman out of rain. Right? Oh my god. Fucking Ayatollah has binted his last, right? And may an Ayatollah never get the chance to bint again, right?
I think doing this makes scaling a bit more interesting, as now you don't have some random dimension be called an extra dimension or a hyperspace, and now is somehow beyond infinitely greater than anything ever shown before.
Okay, so I will have to say that he actually does have a real point here, which is that, like, in fiction, the term dimension is very nebulous, right? You have to actually determine what exactly you mean when you say the word dimension. Because sometimes a dimension refers to, like, a pocket universe, right? Or a pocket space, in which case it is just a three-dimensional space, but it is nested alongside our three-dimensional space in a way that we cannot normally access it, right? So in that particular case, it's not actually implying anything more than the three-dimensional space that we already occupy. In fact, actually, that's a common misconception, is that the many worlds interpretation doesn't actually require you to have extra dimensions to nest all the universes next to each other. In fact, actually, probably one of the ways that people probably should know about if they're going to talk about that is the Max Tegmark take on the Everettian model, which actually just has these various universes as being finite size variations in a repeating pattern across an infinitely quilted multiverse. Let's see. Oh god, they're doing something again, right? Let's see. He got through the chat, guys. Super Mario 64 was peak childhood. It really was, right? But yeah, like but sometimes when they talk about like dimensions in fiction, they are talking about basically a pocket space. They're not talking about something that's actually like an extra degree of freedom. Sometimes they are, though, right? Because like in Godzilla and a number of like tokusatsu series from the Showa era, they actually did lean into that in things like Zone Fighter, right? So that is actually like a canonical thing there. But sometimes, again, a dimension can refer to a universe, like, so we're talking about parallel worlds, again, not really extra dimensional. And sometimes dimension is used actually correctly. So again, you have to actually look at the context to see what exactly they mean when you're doing this, which is, again, where the debate thing comes in. F's in the chat for a cosmic making it through the chaos, right? Giggity giddy. Oh my god.
Anyway, I hope this was informative, and please share this information throughout the community. The more we actually learn and develop, the less we get shit on. Anyway, have a nice one. And Mr. Crafty, out.
Yeah, I don't really buy that argument. It doesn't really fly. It doesn't pass the bullshit meter, in my opinion. Like, I respect the opinion, and there is absolutely room for this, right? Because, again, it's kind of like with mathematics, where when you get to the higher levels, you start discussing things like axioms. Like, what axioms are we using? Do we have the axiom of choice, or are we foregoing the axiom of choice, for example? And this really does affect a lot of the higher end math. And we can do the exact same thing in power scaling, right? For example, this is kind of the point of like an equal stats match, right? Is the idea like, okay, if the stats are equal, who wins? So it's like a question on the context of skill, right? Or you could have, or hacks, for example. Or you could have the issue of like, all right, we're not going to assume an infinite universe for DC, Marvel, or what's another Oh yeah, or like Dragon Ball, right? So like we're gonna use a finite calculation, which is what Death Battle does, right? Well, like in Marvel, like the like finite calculation would be that like when Cosmic Hulk, when you know, Hulk became a cosmic beast of rage, and he could hear atoms up to like a trillion light years away, right? Like that's pretty damn big. And then you find out that like again the galaxy from which fuck, what was his name? I think his name is Ran. But yeah, the guy who uses the Zeta tubes in fucking he's not a character I really pay much attention to in DC, but like apparently got taken to him and Superman got taken to Maxima's galaxy, which was like 200 trillion light years or something like that away from the Milky Way. It was like absurdly huge stats, but still not actually nearly as large as the thing that is actually correct about their settings, which is they live in infinitely sized universes by decree of the people who've actually written these stories. Let's see. Oh, hello, Road. That's entirely fair, right? Yeah, we're just doing a thing on power scaling right now. It's like a finite calculation, like Red Hulk held up a continent. I mean, yeah, you could do that calculation, and even then, it's like, well, what are we talking about when we mean continent, right? Like, what continent did he hold up? Did he hold up the whole continent? These are all questions that we could hammer out, and they do affect the outcome of the debate, and this is actually what makes the debate interesting, right? Because depending on what axioms you go into, for example, are you going to do pixel scaling? Are you going to do like more lore? Are you going to include lore and narrative scaling? Because, like, for example, if you did like the narrative implication, then Mark at the end of Invincible, when he becomes Emperor Mark, very likely is significantly stronger than Thrag was at the end of the series, right? Because that's kind of like how the story builds up Mark over time, right? But yeah, anyway, ran in as as in I ran, right? Fair enough, Rudy. Okay, so now we're gonna hear the affirmative case from Surfbone.
Dimensional tiering, probably the most controversial, misunderstood, and hard to research concepts in power scaling.
This is actually a pretty difficult thing to research in power scaling because is exactly this. Remember the whole thing is like depending on the context, dimension can mean a lot of different things. Kura says Atrocitus versus Hulk would be a never-ending battle. Yeah, I can give you that. Well, no, actually, it kind of depends. I think the upper level of power in DC, at least in because other people will disagree with me, but I think DC outscales Marvel in terms of just like pure cosmology. But Hulk did break the chains made of the first firmament, and that is a wild feat if we understand what the first firmament is in Marvel cosmology. That's like insane. So and Atrocitus is not nearly to the heights of the lanterns, right? He's not exactly going to be in a toe-to-toe with Kyle Rayner, for example, right? So I actually think Hulk actually has this one, even though I think DC scales higher. That's just my opinion. Let's see. Captain Rudy says, I'm sorry, but Surfbone sounds like the name of a beachside gay bar. Fair enough, right? I think I'm still in his server, by the way.
We often use this when attempting to grasp the true scale of certain fictional characters. They can either destroy time-space continuums, or better yet, exist in higher realms even beyond our own comprehension.
Yeah, because this isn't exactly going to be any relevant to, like, Invincible scaling, right? Invincible's not going to fucking punch a universe out of existence, right? Although Sailor Moon can. Well, not punch, but, there's multiple girls in Sailor Moon in the manga, at least, that can, like, straight up just blow up the universe with how powerful they are. And Sailor, was it Nehelina? No, it was Galaxia. Sailor Galaxia, just straight up mogged, like 4 or 5 of them at the same time. Like, well, It took Dragon Ball all the way to Super to catch up with this, right?
And by the end of this video, you'll find out that dimensional tiering is actually much simpler than you may have originally thought. So without further ado, let's get straight into it.
Yeah, this is actually one of the things I do like about dimensional tiering, is that it is actually pretty straightforward.
So, some of you may be asking, well, what is dimensional tiering? Well, dimensional tiering is the type of scaling that doesn't ignore the differences between dimensional quantities. Or in other words, to dimensionally tier something is to take into account how many dimensions the thing occupies. So for example, if a character destroyed a tesseract, also known as a hypercube,
Chuck Norris is the only human to get into a fight with the Hulk and win. Yes, and he won by not even having to throw a single punch for one reason and one reason alone. He gave the Hulk a puppy, his one weakness. By the way, yes, that is Hulk's big weakness in Marvel. If you give him puppies, the Hulk will unrage. It is actually kind of charming. But, let's see. Kuro says both are based on anger for strength is what I'm getting at. I mean, that is true, yes. But I think the Hulk edges out on this one. Fushizi says, I think my favorite character that completely fucking breaks power scaling is John Constantine. Oh, don't even get me started. Right? You were talking about, earlier someone brought up Lovecraft scaling, and it's like, oh yeah, they're not... Take John Constantine and consider the shit he does in his own, considering his own cosmology, right?
using dimensional tiering, this would be a fourth dimensional feat, since tesseracts or hypercubes are defined by being fourth.
Every man has his weakness, correct, right?
So why does this difference matter?
My weakness is goblin girls.
Well, let me give you an example to show you how important this difference is. Let's take a square with a length and a width of 1 unit. This square is a true two-dimensional object, and thus has absolutely no height at all. And if we compare it to a cube with at least 1 in length, width, and height, how many squares could we fit into the cube?
This is a thing that I think earlier, that CraftyScales was alluding to earlier, now that he's bringing this up, is that sometimes people will suggest that, like, the difference is not real because, again, there's no, that, like, extra dimensions are already conceived of in, like, physics. I've seen this brought up. I don't think this is a good argument. Because, like, you're operating under the idea that, like, fiction operates under the same, like, principles as, like, real physics. And first of all, I wouldn't even say that this is real physics. It's, like, pure math pretending to be physics. But, obviously, fictional stories operate under their own scientific, principles. But, their own magical principles. So it's like, just because it applies in the real world, or theoretically in the real world, doesn't necessarily mean in the fictional world, or vice versa. But that you could, for example, make the argument that we already know how to do energy calculations for higher dimensions due to things like string theory, or for example, geometric unity is another example from Eric Weinstein. That's what his name was. I was drawing a blank. Or for example, again, the Lie 8 theory by Garrett Lisi. So, like, all these theories that, like, posit these extra dimensions that we've never seen, and we will never see, by the way, because they don't exist. But yeah, like, so we do have ways to calculate this energy. But the thing that they don't tell you is that if those theories are true, we don't live in a 3D universe, right? Those extra dimensions still exist. They just have to be curled up on themselves. So we still don't actually live in a three-dimensional universe. So we only live in an illusion of a three-dimensional universe, right? So the energy content of our universe would be, again, like, actually a, like, 10, or, like, I guess if it's like the Lie E8 theory, like a 380 something dimensional, system. Just it appears dimensional to us because all those other dimensions are curled up on each other, and on themselves. So again, I could see someone trying to make that argument. I wouldn't find it very strong at all. Kuro says, "Oh my god." So it's like Captain Rudy said, every man has his weakness. Fucking Rhodes says, don't forget the Time Lords and Daleks from Doctor Who and the Time Wars were creating and destroying entire timelines. This is the point it was time was breaking, right? Or the Daleks with the reality bomb, right? Or the Pandorica episode. where it's like that wasn't even the Time Lords. Let's see. Goblin girls, you say? Be right back. Indeed. Fushizi said, "This is what I meant." Yes. And then Kura says, "Mine is orc women. Death by snoo snoo." Yes. He loves his women strong. Oh my God. Hold on. I was gonna end it after this, but Kura, stay around. I have a video to show you.
Well, the square has no height or zero height, so even an infinite amount of squares stacked on top of each other still wouldn't make a cube.
Yeah, this is basic math and basic geometry.
So to ignore dimensionality is to ignore just how many squares the cube can fit within it. This is the same problem of how many zeros are needed to be added together to reach 1. To go in reverse of how many squares this cube level person can
Okay, that's funny.
destroy, we have to talk
I
about
forgot that was in here.
energy, which would be in joules. A joule is when a force of 1 unit, which is when an object of 1 kilogram has an acceleration of 1 meter per second, acts on that object in the direction of the force's motion through a distance of 1 meter.
Yes.
So joules are in part defined by a weight. Obviously, something like a 1 by 1 by 1 meter cube of rock has a sub.
Kura says, "Don't threaten me with a good time." Oh, I have a shit post for you that you're gonna love.
But for a perfectly flat square, this is less obvious. It doesn't even really make sense to apply a weight to something that is similar to the number of zeros needed to reach 1. A weight, like a kilogram, is exclusively a 3-dimensional measurement, which means that normal joule values cannot be applied to higher or lower dimensioned objects without producing ridiculous results like beyond infinite joules, which isn't very useful. A point is a 0-dimensional object. A line is a 1-dimensional object. Something like a square is 2D, and something like a cube is 3D. But how do we deal with objects with more than 3 dimensions? And what even is a 4th-dimensional object? Well, to start talking about objects with more than 3 dimensions, we can look back at our good old friends, the square and the cube. With how many squares can be stacked into the cube, or how many zeros are needed to reach 1, we need to understand that the difference between a cube and a hypercube or tesseract are the same. It's important to know here that this difference has nothing to do with time, which
This is a good point, because like we often call time the 4th dimension. In physics, we actually have a specific distinction between these. We call, for example, the 3 spatial dimensions, they're not called spatial dimensions, they're called space-like dimensions, right? And then the time dimension is called a time-like dimension. And the reason they say the like part is to avoid absolute identification and to avoid the whole question of like absolutism and like relationalism and all these other things in regards to like the philosophy of space, and then to avoid issues like presentism and eternalism in the issue of the philosophy of time, right? So that's why they use like space-like and time-like in that particular context. Let's see. Kura says, "We will still have to see if I have to learn something of your choosing if you don't laugh at the that Fleek video." Let's see. Are we all receiving death by snoo snoo because I'm here? Oh, goddamn. Fucking Kura, my man. So yeah, I actually have asked the question about more than one dimension of time, right? Because there is a thing called 2T physics. It's a Middle Eastern scientist whose name's escaping me at the moment. Came up with one 2T physics system, and then there's a version of string theory that has 2 time-like dimensions called F theory. So it's distinct from M theory, and it's basically M theory with an extra time dimension. So it's like instead of a time line, it's more of a time plane. What exactly that does, I don't fucking know. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, when you add 2 different dimensions of time, things kind of become uncalculable as far as I can discern it. And I'm not the only one. I have like actual papers on my computer arguing that if there's more than one dimension of time, it would be calculation would become impossible. And I actually kind of agree with them on that.
a lot of people misconstrue as the 4th dimension, or something similar. Taking time away from a cube wouldn't make it any easier to destroy, and time as a rate of change doesn't really follow this structure that we have laid out here as the next step beyond a cube. What we mean here by 4D is an axis or coordinate of space beyond the usual 3. It's hard to understand what this is like because we don't seem to perceive dimensions beyond 3.
Well, I mean, I would argue it's because there are no dimensions in reality beyond 3, right? That's just me. I don't buy it. I actually agree with Sabina Hoffsenfelder on this. I don't think that these extra dimensions exist. You're going to pay for higher and higher cost accelerators, and you're not going to find anything. And again, I mean, I guess it's fine if you're a European, right? And you're sinking all your money into like a particle accelerator that's not going to give you anything. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the particle accelerator will actually provide you something. But like even the people who think that these extra dimensions exist don't expect to really find anything below the Planck length. Oh, not Planck length, but like Planck energy. And that's such a high energy requirement that you would need an accelerator the width of the like actual planet in order to do. So it's just not happening, right? Even if it does exist, we just would not know about it.
It doesn't even really make sense to say something like the fourth or the third dimension. There's nothing special about each dimension. They are all just lines at different angles, even if these angles are pretty extreme.
Yes, well, I mean, all angles. So, like, again, we call it a degree of freedom, but you could think about it as like a 90-degree angle turn, right? So it's like if you're going along the x-axis, right? In order to go on the y-axis, you stop moving along the x-axis and you take a 90-degree turn either way, right? So there's two ways you could turn. Either way, it's a 90-degree turn from where you were going in the first place, right? And then if you want to go along the third dimension, you take another 90-degree turn, but a 90-degree turn that is not the direction you were going in the first place, right? So it's not parallel to where you were going or where you would have been coming from. And that would give you the third dimension. And you could just repeat this process an infinite number of times, and that would give you, for example, what you would find in, I guess, like a mathematical Hilbert space, right? Kura says, timeline. Time is not made of lines, it is made of circles. That's why the clocks are round. As Kirsha says, time is a flat circle.
We can only really talk about an object or a space having 2 or 3 or whatever number of dimensions. In this sense, it doesn't work to count time amongst these either, because it is known to be very different from any of the others, which are all identical. And there also isn't really any reason to think of it as the fourth. A purely square world could have time and a rate of change, so we can describe 2D objects as having area, 3D objects as having volume, and a 4D object would have something called hypervolume. So what about even higher dimensions? Well, we can do this extension from a cube to a hypercube any number of times. Literally, pick any number you want, and that object or space could have that many dimensions, and it would be superior to each previous dimensioned object or space following the same pattern.
See, this makes intuitive sense to me, right? Yeah. Yeah, Fushizi recognized the red versus blue quote, yes. Caboose, shut up! Oh my god.
Even infinite dimensional objects or spaces are fine, and real-life ways of calculating these even exist, like with something known as a Hilbert space.
There are other ones, like you could also use Hilbert spaces are not the most fundamental thing. They are very useful in things like quantum mechanics, but we also have to, in quantum mechanics, consider things like a pre-Hilbert space. So this is not the end-all be-all to like the whole space conversation.
Which can account for infinite dimensions.
God damn it. Okay, red versus blue just took over the chat, it seems. Chicken Tender 19. Church, is that you? I missed you.
People often refer to 12 dimensions or any other finite number higher as hyperversal. Then infinite dimensions and beyond is known as high hyperversal.
I don't like these terms. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I do not like these terms. I do not think they're very useful.
We can extend this dimensional difference principle to any extent that we like. In objects or spaces that go completely beyond any extent of dimensions, we call low outer versal.
Outerversal. So okay, so depending on who you're talking to, the words hyperversal and outerversal are going to be meaning different things. The way I tend to use outerversal is I'm referring to something that does not exist within space or time at all, right? So, like, it would not have any spatial extent, and it would not experience duration in time. That would be my definition of outerversal, but like not everyone uses it that way. Versus Battle Wiki and character stats and profiles wiki, a lot of these places use these terms for very different things.
Actually, the difference between low outerversal and high hyperversal is bigger even than the difference between a 3D object and a high hyperversal one. To give you an idea of how impressive this is, despite popular belief, you can't simply reach the tier of low outerversal by simply stacking infinite dimensions on top of each other and then some, as low outerversal would be beyond the restrictions of dimensionality in total. So that's low outerversal. What would be the qualifications for baseline outerversal? Well, outerversal, not low outerversal, is being above the concept of spatial dimensionality. Which then begs the question, what even is a concept, and why would it matter here? A concept can mean many, many different things.
So when they're talking about concept here, they're talking basically what is a Platonic form. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, Pro Chat seems to be wigging the fuck out right now.
But in this case, a concept of something refers to some kind of abstract object or rule that is superior to all aspects of that particular notion, and makes the thing that it's about even possible in the first place.
So yeah, it's basically a Platonic form. Kura says, remember when Lopez was stuck with Caboose and Caboose understood him and Lopez lost his shit when he understands me? You team killing fuckwad! Yeah. Fucking Fushizu, like me, I'm just a parasitic anti-meme, right?
For example,
God, I love that show. Red vs. Blue was actually peak among, like, Rooster Teeth content.
Concept of an apple, this particular meaning of the term concept, would be superior to all possible apples, and would be the thing that makes those apples even possible at all. So in this case, being beyond the concept of dimensionality is more impressive because this is what makes it possible for dimensionality or space to occur in the first place. This is why the specification is important, as it doesn't equate to simply being beyond space. As with additional context, it could easily be referring to something being beyond a 3D space, which would make you 4D, or being beyond 4D space, which would make you 5D, etc. The point here is that something simply being beyond space is vague and lacks the predictive power to definitively mean something like being beyond the concepts of space would. Additionally, the concept of space would also encompass all dimensionality, as dimension space is merely a type of space.
Yeah, the form of space would include any kind of spatial relation, right? So, yeah, any kind of, like, higher or lower dimensional space would be encompassed by the form of space. Hold on. Let's see, fucking Kura says, oh wait, Chicken Tender says, it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my fault, someone put that wall in my way. Fucking Kura, it was the cruelest fate Lopez could have suffered, and it was glorious. Yes. Captain Rudy says, check your DMs. I did, actually. That was a really nice render of my character. I quite like it. What is this? And oh my god, you put the Goblin Girl in there, and you put the Goblin Girl with almost the stuff on my dress on there. Fair enough, right? He's already sending me my weakness. Goblins, right? Let's see. Road says, well, I can't really stay for longer. Gotta get back to work. Have fun, y'all. Thanks for streaming. No problem, Road. You have a lovely day at work, and I hope you enjoy yourself. Captain Rudy says, Eustace, when people learn how to decipher his garble. Yep. Let's see. Chicken Tender says, have a good night. Kuro says, no. In Eustace's case, he slowly makes people understand him, which makes it all the more terrifying. Oh, it wasn't slow at all for me. I caught it on pretty quickly. Fushizi says, so what I'm learning is, as with everything, problems people have with this is just that they are shitty writers. Yeah, quite. Sometimes it really is just a shitty writing thing. Because it's like, a certain degree of consistency is kind of required for stakes, especially if you're going to be talking about things like, again, superpowers and magic and that kind of stuff. Power scaling internal power scaling, like where everyone stands in relation to each other, is actually really important, because like if you never know who stands where in relation to who, right? There's no stakes, right? If in Mark's first encounter with Thrag, he fucking put Mark put his arm through Thrag's gut, it would kind of take all the wind out of the sails of Thrag as a threat, right? Let's see. Chicken Tender says, it's funny how many people struggle to understand him, though. Yeah, I guess, right? Oh, Eustace, yes. Yes, it is funny. It's kind of like Boomhauer, where it's like, I never had a problem understanding anything Boomhauer said. And like, there are people who really struggle with it. I'm like, okay. I would never have guessed that, but okay.
Which then brings us to high outerversal, which is simply being beyond an outerversal thing to the same extent that a normal outerversal thing is beyond normal human beings. Now, hypothetically, we could invent tiers above this, but for the sake of the video,
I do think that this is a little bit arbitrary as a benchmark, to be perfectly honest.
high outerversal includes everything above this. Now that we've talked about what is actually beyond dimensionality, we can now talk about things that aren't, such as transfinite amount of dimensions. Obviously,
Yes, the transfinite, right?
by having a specific amount of dimensions means you are still bound by dimensionality. So, hypothetically, you define a tier as having Aleph null dimensions. That would be less impressive than someone who is unbound by dimensionality.
For anyone who doesn't know, an Aleph null is the smallest infinite cardinal, right?
And also just wouldn't be what we defined as outerversal instead of being higher into what we would call high outerversal. I should also mention that simply having a transfinite number mentioned doesn't really mean anything. In order to actually be useful, it has to relate to an amount of things, be it planets, universes, dimensions, etc.
Of course, it actually has to have something you can like compare and contrast it against.
Lastly, I'd like to mention that you can have higher dimensioned or even beyond dimensioned AP without the existence of being on that level.
Yeah, this is also a thing people forget, is like, again, you can imagine a man fly like Superman, right? So it's not all that hard to imagine a man, like a flatlander, break a 3D, like, cube, right?
So, a character could be 3D in size while still affecting things with more than 3 dimensions. There's really no reason to say this can't be the case unless you decide to read a page wrong. Well, anyway, that's it for my dimensional tiering video. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you're wondering what the next video is going to be, it's not going to be some video listing.
Ah! Okay, that's actually really funny. DBosity asked, transfinite, is that an infinity identifying as finite? That's actually really funny. Okay, my pro chat is actually working again. So now I can actually see things from Kick again. Let's see, where did we stop off? God damn it, Fushizi, right? And then I was banned because of chat, right? Kionala, why so late? Because I had time, right? Hello, Kionala. So, fun fact, I have been streaming, and I have been streaming to YouTube. It's just I had apparently set my YouTube streams to be on unlisted, and I did not know this, and that's why they weren't showing up. So, now that they're on public, hopefully I'll be able to get more streams out. Chicken Tender 19 says, does fucking Eustace have dyslexia or something? Because how the fuck can his AI understand it? Oh my god, right? What do you call trans person in a wheelchair? Transportation. Oh my god. was like, Captain Rudy said, that's what I asked Depthswalker. He doesn't understand how it works either. Let's see. Kura says, I can only absolutely verify it's how he writes prompts. He broke Grok to understand Houstonese. Chicken Tender says, God damn you, Rudy. That is terrible but hilarious. He's got to commit to the bit. Captain Rudy says, it's a finite identifying as infinity. Oh my god. Chicken Tender 19 says, that is a wild as hell. That is wild as hell. I don't feel it's easy to break Grok so damn. Yeah, fair enough, right? But, yeah, I think that there's a better case to be made on Surfbone's position than there is on Mr. Crafty's particular case. That's just me.
Off all the tiers, but instead, it's going to be about what even is a tiering system and what it exactly entails to use one. If you guys want me to talk about each individual tier, I was thinking of covering them both as a YouTube short and a TikTok, which you should
I didn't realize I had the video, the volume still low. Damn it.
go give a follow, by the way, as I will often post short videos on there in between these long and elaborate YouTube videos. But please do let me know if this is what you guys want in my comments. I would also like to give a massive thank to my two friends Hashi and Webcam Parent in the creation of this script. Trust me when I say, if it wasn't for them, this video wouldn't be possible. But until then, thank you all for watching, and class is dismissed.
I think the argument that he basically makes here is fairly easy to understand. I don't really see how anyone would have a problem understanding it. I do think that there are better arguments Mr. Crafty probably could have made for his position. I just don't think that even the strong arguments are all that good for Mr. Crafty's position, so I'm not exactly envious of him trying to come up with arguments. But yeah, that's just my opinion. So I guess if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to let me know who you side with. Do you side with Mr. Crafty, or do you side with Surfbone in regards to the power scaling question when it comes to like dimensional tiers, right? Because the implications get pretty wild depending on like which side you take. So that'll be it for this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you. I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you next time in the next video. Bye.